I am never going to be a victim. I'm never going to sit in the grandstands of life and watch others and be the what, shoulda, woulda, coulda. I'm not wired that way, not built that way.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales.
Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Hello and welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartman, and on this podcast, we connect with construction industry leaders from across the country to share their insights on leadership, obviously, personal improvement, and to share practical, tactical tips to help you build trust faster and lead more persuasively. We feature my conversation with Mr. Tony Stewart. As you will hear in our conversation, Tony is very thoughtful about just about everything. His career, which he views like a football game with 4 quarters, and he, in this episode, shares his journey from working in a macaroni factory to becoming a quote-unquote recovering architect, and then his pursuit to become a master builder and ultimately a trusted advisor to owners and clients. Now, this idea of striving to become a trusted advisor is not new. I mean, to become one, all you need to do is to earn trust and share some advice, and really, who wouldn't want that? Now, what Tony has done differently than anyone else I've encountered is to develop his own equation of trust, which he uses to evaluate his own behavior, his own relationships, and most importantly, from my perspective, because he did this for me, he coaches others on how to apply it to their relationships as well. So I don't want to give away anything more. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy my conversation with Mr. Tony Stewart. So Mr. Tony Stewart.
Yes.
Welcome to the
you.
show.
Thank you.
Yeah, excited to have you here.
Very good.
I've been thinking about you a lot from one of our earlier conversations because I'm reading a book right now, almost finished, by David Epstein. It's called Range, and I'm going to butcher the subtitle, but it's something along the lines of why generalists thrive in a world of specialization or something along those lines.
Okay.
And just understanding kind of your career and your willingness to go down a path and excel in it and then transition in another direction. But I really think, to some degree, I'm interested to get your thoughts on kind of that generalist approach that has really benefited you. So do you mind sharing a little bit about your career?
Yeah, so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of my story.
Of course.
So you're right, Bradley. I have a bit of a renaissance outlook on my life, both personally and professionally. Professionally, when I was growing up, always played with model airplanes and built things. And so the built environment was my genre. I was going to be someplace in the built environment. So I became an architect, went to school at Washington State University, came out, spent 10 years at a big design firm here in Seattle, MBBJ, learned how to be an architect, got licensed, but then also realized that about year 9, I then came upon this idea that I was going to organize my career a bit like a football game. And
I love me some football analogies. So go into that.
Yeah, I know. So, and if anybody knows me, I it's a curse and a blessing. I tell you, I think and speak in word pictures, and I talk through analogies a lot. So I will ask for forgiveness on the front end of this conversation if I go off on a tangent and articulate or share my thoughts through imagery and analogies. But back to this football game, I looked at the built environment and have continued to look at the built environment as there's a traditional 3 legs of the stool in our world: architect, contractor, owner. Those are the 3 historic main ingredients to bring the built environment to life, buildings per se. And I figured, you know what, if I could be an architect for a period of time, and for me that was 10 years, magic number. I needed to spend 10 years truly learning the art and the business of architecture. Then I left that and I said, I'm going to start over. And I became a contractor, all with the lens that I would eventually, if I had any ability to become an owner, and if I knew what the other 2 cats were up to, I might have half a chance to be good at doing that. But mapping this idea into a football game is, so in a football game, there's 4 quarters, right? There's halftime. I thought, hey, in a 40-year career, fair number, 10 years is a good solid time to spend time mastering something, architecture. And I said, hey, the first quarter of my life, of course, for quarter of my professional 10-year life, I'm going to be an architect. My second quarter, I'm going to be a general contractor, learn about the whole business of construction. At that point, you're 20 years in your career, and there's halftime, and I call that midlife crisis. There's a lot of stuff that happens, both to men and women differently, some inflicted upon and some greatly self-inflicted.
For sure.
And I had my own go in the locker room, look in the mirror, figure out what's my purpose, what does I want to, how do I show up in life? So that was my halftime, and I can tell you today, after almost 35 years, my wife and I are enjoying each other still after 35 years. I have a lot of friends that come out of halftime looking quite different in the third quarter of their life after 20, 25 years in the biz. So I think third quarter, I call those peak earning years.
Absolutely.
So the idea is that when you get to the fourth quarter of your career, do what you want to do, not what you have to do. And wouldn't it be really cool at that fourth quarter game to take 30 years, 35 years of experience and just do the things you want to do and add huge amounts of value in places that you're greatly appreciated?
At what point were you able to, whether it's the football analogy or just saying like, I'm going to develop an expertise and go down a way, but then we're going to take a step back. There's some risk there. And was your wife and your family on board for this, or was it more organic that ultimately kind of that stage and that football analogy came to you?
I would tell you, Bradley, it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
My wife, Jean, is my best friend and a great partner. When I seek advice, she generally is the first person. And it hasn't been exactly always the best, journey. It's always had its bumps and bruises, and so she's always been there with me.
Yeah.
But it's been a bit organic, but also at the same time more so purposeful.
Okay.
So the belief that I would climb a mountain professionally, accomplish being an architect, and then choose to look around the horizon and go, you know what, there's a mountain over there, and I want to go climb that. She's always been supportive of that and said, go. Because I get a huge amount of value out of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning because my mind is buzzing. I got a steep hill to climb.
Yeah.
I need to earn. I'm grateful a lot of people gave me the right to be in the room, but I spend a lot of time earning my right to stay in the room. Yeah. And so I love to be taught and to teach. Yeah. So those kind of journeys and the next set of challenges has been kind of the elixir for me. It's my lifeblood to be fed in that way. Yeah. And believe me, it's a whole lot better when you self-inflict. It takes a lot of courage, risk.
Yeah.
There's been times where it hasn't been self-inflict and you kind of go, okay, that wasn't a good move. But like anything, there's millions of points that occur in your life and not any single one is going to completely define you as an individual. It's an aggregate.
Yep. No, I think that's really powerful. And literally, a conversation I had an hour before I came here was with a really talented woman who's been in the industry a long time and who had been unhappy for a long time. However, making good money and this idea of doing something else. And we've talked a little bit about, this idea of personal journeys. And I always think back to the book, The Alchemist, but this idea of when you take that risk and you do something and you kind of set aside the money and you say, I got to try this. Yeah. Oftentimes the world kind of pulls together and helps you along the way. And there's always obstacles, but
I'm with you 100%. There's two primary questions that are really the north arrows for me, both personally and professionally. And I always have this in front of mind in any kind of, go, no-go decision-making or crossroads is, what is it I'm trying to achieve? And what does success look like? If I generally have the answers to if I sat here a year from now and I achieved what I set out to achieve and I really delivered on what success looks like, because I verbalize it, everything else seems to ski in its wake. A lot of stuff just gets taken care of. And what I've realized, I wish I would have known this certainly sooner in my life, is the confidence to say I'm not going to argue my limitations. It's easy to sit in the grandstands of life and watch others play on their field of play and how they score points. And so I said, I'm going to, back to kind of my football analogies or sports analogies. And by the way, I was never a big sports. I never played sports. I was into music in high school. But nonetheless, I love the analogies and the context of sports. But what's your field of play? How do you score points? Who's your fan base? But even more importantly, Bradley, who's not on your field of play? Mm-hmm. And who's not in your fan base? And I really got resonant in 100% of everything that happens in my life, personally and professionally. I have responsibility for. I have a hand in everything that happens. So that means that I am never going to be a victim. I'm never going to sit in the grandstands of life and watch others and be the shoulda, woulda, coulda. I'm not wired that way, not built that way. And thankfully, Gene and I think in a similar context. Mm-hmm. So at least that's my story to date.
Yeah. We haven't touched on this at all, but I was just curious when it comes to strengths finders and kind of talent evaluation and how we define the results that we're going towards and the criteria about roles and responsibilities. One thing that I often see working with clients is, while we understand we want to focus on strengths, and I'm a big believer for me and my team, this idea very along the same lines from Dan Sullivan, which is about kind of your unique ability, which is what are you uniquely gifted to do, and how do we put you in that place, more often than not in like 80% of your or 90% of your time, but a lot of times on these talent evaluations and whether it's every 6 months or annual reviews, we do sometimes focus more on the deficiencies. Just kind of your perspective on kind of how you manage that with your team and how you think about that conceptually.
Yeah, I think the idea of self-awareness and what I've enjoyed about strength finders is it's very science-based. Mm-hmm. It's based on how your brain is wired. And I can tell you I've been doing this now for 3 or 4 years, and every time I've done strength finders analysis with teammates or teams, most people are drinking the Kool-Aid because they're looking at the results and go, yep, peg it, yep, pin the tail on the donkey, that's me. So all that being said is this is what your unique gifts are. You said it, Bradley. These are unique talents. The premise is build your entire life around your talents, personally and professionally, and to spend little to no time working on what I call holes in your sock or holes in your game. Yeah. And the honeypot of all that is when you take 5 different people who have 5 different sets of talents, or in case 25 different types of talents, and when we bring them together as a team, you put that into the system, and you come up with a team-based top 5. Yeah. And therein lies the rich conversation of not asking individually any one of you to change. I'm asking you to increase your self-awareness for yourself, and even more importantly, these other 4 cats that you're going to play with. Yeah. And then when you play, here's the tendencies. And so could we get to a point where we could mix the right kind of DNA in a balanced way so that there would be higher probability of team assembly to success? Mm-hmm. That's back to, again, honeypot is where the real juice of it all is why do certain teams excel, right? The intangible. And again, in sports, the same kind of, what is it about the LA Lakers in that era or the Bulls or any other team? You could quantify the talents, but then to qualify the intangibles, I think had a lot to do with their gifts and how the gifts covered up others' weaknesses, and the whole was greater than individual parts. Yeah. And so in teaming and design and construction and real estate, having a tool to give a line of sight to predicting some outcome, and I can tell you, in the world of contractors, which are heavy engineers, if you have them, I have them at hello if it's through science first, and then we can transcend into art, into the intangible, into the self-awareness, and who wouldn't want to up their game? I mean, at any point, this is this lifelong learner in me, this person who loves to teach and to be taught, is everybody's got room to improve their game. Yeah. So that's what I've digged about Strength Finders as a tool. That's great. It's increased my game, and now I'm using it, and I continue, but using it to, on my teams, have them improve the dynamics between them. Yeah. So far, so good.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you about, as we think of kind of relationships and team assembly, but also in your role with customers, the core of relationships is really how do you generate trust, and how do you build trust, authentic trust?
Yeah.
Obviously, self-awareness is a huge part. I think a kind of a precursor to that. And I think in your role, when you're dealing with clients who are coming to you and looking for you to be kind of that trusted advisor with $100 million plus at stake, I wonder if I might be able to ask you kind of, let's break those into two parts and let's kind of talk about trust.
Okay.
Are there certain things you do or lessons you've learned about ways to build trust in a way that is, I hate to use the word efficient, but you're allowing that to happen relatively quickly, but in a way that is truly authentic as well?
Yeah. So I actually developed an equation on this. So
you did.
This is the engineer architect in me now speaking, but I developed an equation. I'm not claiming to be the author of it, but I've been embellishing this now for some time, where if you took trust,
okay,
and on the top of the equation would be C squared plus R plus I divided by S. So if you,
I got my pen ready. I'm writing this down.
Yeah,
I'm tracking you here.
So T equals C squared plus R plus I divided by S.
Okay.
So in the education I've done and what I do for others on this topic is trust is equal to C squared, which is compatibility and credibility.
Okay.
Right. So compatibility is a little bit in the hands of the recipient.
Yep.
Hey, are Bradley, are you and I compatible?
Yeah.
That's a two-way street.
Sure.
But on the credibility side, I can build some credibility through lots of experience and to always keeping my promises. So that's a fairly quantifiable thing. I can have some control over credibility. The compatibility, I think, is more of a variable. But the R then is reliability. Okay. I will always do what I say I will do. And again, as human beings, we can control the amount of reliability. So if I got some control on credibility, compatibility maybe is a little up to both of us. The reliability, I got control over. Okay, so here's the scary part for, again, in a house of engineers, I is intimacy. How do you transcend this trust to a level of what I call a living room level relationship? It's one thing to have a business card level relationship, transaction kind of based relationship, but to get to what I call a living room level relationships with business partners and clients and those folks, this is where you access deep private information.
Yeah.
And it is the unfair competitive advantage that each one of us has within us if we choose to go there with intimacy. So let's complete this equation. When you take all of that and you divide it by self-orientation, right?
Go into that a little bit.
So I believe there is a huge chasm, but so subtle, between these two words, interested versus interesting. Mm-hmm. And we know human beings that show up like this. And I've certainly traveled this journey as an individual, as a man, is how do I show up in life? Do I show up curious and interested in others? Or do I show up interesting to others? Right. And what's important to me? And so that divided by my own self-orientation means it isn't about me in the context of this topic of building trust.
Right.
My orientation is to show up interested and curious in others. And surefire way to do that is I show up with more questions than I do answers.
Yeah.
I do this exercise every so often where I spend 24 hours without an opinion. It's a really bizarre exercise, but try it. How do you do it? Yeah,
yes.
Great, Bradley, great question. How do you spend 24 hours to show up in life without a single opinion? And what's cool about it is it is conditioned me to master and to improve my ability to be a facilitator. Okay. When somebody comes in and say, hey, Bradley, what do you think about this yellow piece of paper? And you wouldn't have an opinion about that yellow piece of paper. You would have observations, and you'd be curious about that. And maybe John over here, who just walked in the room with us, you'd ask him, hey, John, what do you think about the yellow paper that Tony's asking me about? You find yourself facilitating, not showing up with heavy opinions, back to, kind of the constraints I think we put on things, and you show up with blinders wide open.
Yeah.
Super hard. Some people, you folks pay me for my opinion. Mm-hmm. In leadership, I think you transcend to you're paying me to lead and facilitate.
Right.
And in the era of inclusive and more ideas are better and more minds and people have a sense of authorship, if 12 of us are bellied up to the table and making a decision, there isn't one person that's slamming their fist on the table and say, hey, this is the direction. It's a collective, and who the best person to be the maestro in that orchestra to garner all the best of everybody, both up and down, and back to this generalist thing that's coming kind of full circle where I want to be a master facilitator. I want to add value. I want to play every instrument in the band, the architect, the contractor, the real estate, enough to make me dangerous.
Yeah.
I have some credibility.
Sure.
But the maximizer in me, the number one strength finder, is about finding what's good in people and clicking them a dial because of me. So I'm about good to great. I'm about finding how do I maximize the value of Bradley about what he's exceptional at?
Yeah.
And then that ain't good enough because I got to wring the towel and get the best out of him. And I'm going to click him one dial. And that's the maximizer in me. That's the maestro wanting to get the best out of every person at the table. So we digress. We went down a bunch of rabbit trails. I apologize. But back to this trust equation, it's how I've done some math around it, and then getting folks to understand, the compatibility and the intimacy are really the variables.
And having folks even say the word intimacy.
Oh, it's
and
scary.
Intimate. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
still even now as we're sitting here, it's like, as soon as you said, I was like, ooh, I was tracking you pretty good until.
No, I know, because they can come off a little strange, but in the context of an unfair competitive advantage, and you said it, Bradley, this idea of being a trusted advisor, and actually by definition, a trusted advisor is someone that the client calls, relies on for many aspects and understandings of business. The key word is many.
Yeah.
Trusted advisor is that person that can advise along many elements of entire spectrum. And I think in the world of the built environment, and specifically in construction, that we have to understand that 98% of the clients that we provide service to don't do what we do for a living.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
They cure cancer, they make cars, they make airplanes. They have other purpose, they have other whys, other missions in their businesses. And so for us to connect to that, there might be a building that might fall from this $100 million investment that you articulated, but the building is a bit of the byproduct, isn't the end game.
Yeah.
The end game is tied to their business value proposition. And for us to have a line of sight and understand that and build a building and along the way is that trusted advisor position.
Yeah.
And boy, if you can get to that position, it's hard to do quick, right? But I think a lot of us as human beings, well, we're all human beings here, right? But I think people assess pretty darn quickly friend or foe.
Yeah.
In the first kind of human 2 or 3 minute, there's a lot of math or a lot of studies around that. So you can either find reasons to seek me as a friend, or I will give you reasons to seek me as a foe.
Well, I think it's kind of fascinating too, is just even minor shift in thinking, and this I kind of tying back to being interested versus interesting. Is for us, it's easy to sit and say, we build things. We're going to build this for them, and that is it.
Yeah.
However, if you flip it to their perspective, this is just something they need. This is an asset. This is something they need to invest in to further their goals and their mission and deliver,
Yeah. Yep.
On that, I'm always kind of fascinated when the relationship, by the way, I just love the idea of the living room level relationship. That immediately takes you to that place like, okay, and I always kind of judge that as like, how many of my best clients have I been in their home?
Got to that
Have we
pace.
eaten dinner? Have I used their bathroom? That level of, relationship. But how do you do that when sometimes there's either bad news or you have to, based on your experience, your expertise, you got to deliver some candid news to them that might be hard for them to swallow.
Yeah.
Are the things you've learned on where you can be candid and be direct and also be comfortable with the fact that I know they're not going to take this well, but it's really important because it's the right thing to do.
Tough love. I mean, I always kind of think in that context, yes, living room level relationship, but I'm a business partner and you've entrusted me to give you the advice that I think you need in the sandbox that I have expertise in. Again, you don't design and build buildings for a living. That's what I do. You have another purpose in your business. For me to understand that, great. But for me to counsel you and give you the best advice is sometimes tough love. And so actually, I think it's easier if you are in that deeper level relationship, because you know my intentions are solid, and you know my intentions are accurate, and my intentions are to help support you. And so there, I always say, so value, the topic of value, I've got resident, and there's really three kinds of value. Okay. There's product value, right? There's business value, and then there's personal, or call it political value. So each one of us in our businesses and our lives, we understand if, hey, I got a product to deliver, it's got a business value associated with it. I'm a publicly traded company. I need to increase shareholder value. There's a bunch of different metrics on the business. But then there's this political or personal value that each one of us carry with us, that whether, hey, I need to provide air cover because I don't want to be in the front page of the paper and in my company, and if I am because the job went well over budget, you're going to put me in a bad spot and I'm going to get fired. So I think about, hey, the personal value, the political value I can provide you. I think you should do X because here's the risk you have personally. Here's the risk you have from a business standpoint. And what's at risk is the product ultimately. So I look at I touch on all three of those values. How does this advice, good, bad, or indifferent, tough love, affect the product, affect your business, but then even more importantly, how it affects them as human beings personally. And boy, if you have them you're right. And that I'm so glad, because that will provide me the air cover I need to be wildly successful in my business and deliver on the promises. We all have bosses. We're all generally hypersensitive about perception. And so I kind of quantify the tough love, bad news, the tough news in one of those three, two of those three, and then often, boy, if you could do all three of those three, it's pretty hard to argue against that. I don't like what you told me, but, it's the right move.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just an easy to remember framework to just kind of think through this thing oftentimes when we have to give candid advice that might not go well is we have a lot of emotion in that. And how do we make sure emotion doesn't override logic? And this is a kind of a checklist to say, let's think this through, in these terms.
And Bradley, you just triggered a kind of a construct that's always in my mind. Hey, we're human here. I'm a believer that in every ultimate decision that humans make, for the most part, are emotional based. So I think humans make decisions emotionally and they back them up with logic.
Sure.
When I go into Whole Foods and pick the banana off the stand, that's an emotional based decision backed by logic that I know Whole Foods always has got the kind of bananas I love, and I love green bananas. But nonetheless, people foundationally position themselves on logic. But boy, when you go buy that car, it's an emotional based decision. But all the research is done based on logic.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking right here, we stopped in Portland on our way up to Seattle, and I had a friend who had access to, got us a tour of the Nike campus, and we hit the employee store.
Pretty cool.
I grew up in Chicago during the heyday of the Chicago Bulls. So anyway, I don't want to derail this, but I was literally in there walking around being like, this is completely irrational. I do not need 2 additional pairs of shoes. My logic was just grinding, trying to figure out a way to rationalize this.
It's your purpose, though. It resonates with your soul to spend, an obscene sum of money on a pair of shoes that might sit on a shelf. But you know what? True. That's an emotional-based decision. If we understood how each other operated in that vein and provided the kind of, hey, half off on shoes at this end,
right?
Logic would say, hey, man, that's too good of a deal.
That's right. You're saving money. Let's think about this. Right?
That's a great way to what I call lead the witness.
Yeah, that's true. We'll have to figure out a part 2 here. I'm just looking at this equation. I'm like, I have so many other questions on this, but I've got a couple maybe kind of more rapid fire questions for you to kind of wrap up. If you were to enroll in a classroom style leadership class, it could be taught by anyone, living or dead, who would it be?
Have you heard of Simon Sinek?
Yes, absolutely.
So I really enjoy the starting with why, how he's mapped and made a connection to how our human brain is wired from the outer cortex of understanding what and how we do what we do. But the inner part of our brain, which is the non-language, that intuition in our gut, that comes from the inner, I'm not doing it justice, but the inner part of our brain, the why and what is our purpose. So that really resonates with my soul. I've seen a lot of him in TED Talks, would love to kind of be in his presence and learn more. And actually I have a dream at some point doing that myself.
Yeah.
Back to my fourth quarter OT game.
Yeah.
Might be, in that context at some point, who knows?
I'm always curious, folks like yourself, is there a product or service even, or anything you've purchased recently, say under or around $100 that has most impacted your life?
Well, I love the game of golf. I wish I would have taken it up certainly a lot earlier in my life, but I love the game of golf. I have a life promise to be a single-digit handicap golfer, and I know that resonates with a lot of folks.
I like the idea of it. That will never.
It's a long journey. So I bought one of those watches that kind of dials you in, and center green, back of green,
yardage
front yardage, exactly. Okay. So in the context of continuing to up my game, what other arrows in my quiver can I pull out to continue to improve my performance? And make the same analogy personally or professionally and other stuff. Golf, I think, is a great avenue because it's about you against yourself.
So mental.
It's so mental, and to get to that single digit is absolutely mental, and kind of resisting triggers of regression and all of that. So I've recently bought that watch now my wife say, hey, that's not really improving her game, but she loves golf, so I got her one as well.
Okay.
To up her game.
So last question.
Yep.
Should be a very short answer. I have to ask, though. How close are you to your dream, achieving it? What's your handicap now?
I am hovering around 11.
Okay.
But I'll jump up to a 13 pretty quickly, and then it's exponential to push it. I've never been single digit, but so much of it is in a mental state that when you get there, the few times you have these glimmers of spectacular, hey, I got it inside me. I just need to release it and get out of my own way. Is where I am. Yeah.
Well, for any of us who play, have an understanding of what it takes to carry a 10 or 11 or 12 handicap is
hard.
Extremely difficult.
It's very purposeful, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I can't thank you enough. I've got a page and a half of notes here that I have to dig into. But I appreciate you joining the show. Tony Stewart, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Bradley. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope my conversation with Tony was worth your time and attention. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, the Construction Leadership Podcast. I appreciate your time and attention. Once again, we will close out this podcast, the Construction Leadership Podcast, like we always do, with our own leadership mantra. You are owed nothing. Deliver value first.